Okay, so let's dive straight in. We often think about companies, organizations, purely in terms of, shareholders and making a profit.
Right.
But there's this really powerful idea circulating now, well, not entirely new, that organizations actually have a much wider responsibility.
Yeah, looking out for the interests of all their stakeholders, not just the shareholders.
Exactly. And you mentioned it's not new, often linked back to Edward Freeman, maybe 1984.
That's the one. But it feels incredibly relevant, almost urgent today, especially when you layer on these huge environmental and sustainability issues that are hitting basically everyone.
For sure. So that's our mission for this deep dive then. We want to really unpack the sources you've brought, understand why these environmental issues, sustainability issues have become so critical.
Right. Critical for organizations everywhere. I mean, all industries, big, small, doesn't matter.
And we'll look at the pretty significant risks they face if they don't tackle this stuff.
But also the flip side, the real opportunities that can open up if they do. We'll get specific too.
Like looking at industries, maybe fashion, motor industry, see how they're being reshaped?
Exactly. And even how this whole trend is like creating space for completely new kinds of businesses to emerge. It's quite a shift.
It really is. So let's start with that core idea you mentioned, the Stakeholder Balancing Act.
Okay. So the sources really dig into this fundamental tension. Organizations have to deliver for shareholders, obviously.
Yeah, that's the traditional view.
But they also have to serve these other stakeholders now. Employees, customers, the community, the environment itself.
And here's the really interesting bit from the research you found.
Yeah, this is key. It suggests that satisfying these other stakeholders, doing it well, actually seems to have a positive effect, a positive knock-on effect on the company's earnings.
So it actually helps shareholder returns in the long run. It's not just a cost center.
Potentially, yes. That's what the evidence suggests. It's not just about being nice. It can be a driver of actual value.
That really changes the perspective, doesn't it?
It does. And this isn't some, niche concern for a few companies. The sources are clear. These issues are incredibly important everywhere, for everyone.
And there's a competitive angle too, right?
Absolutely. Taking real positive action and being open about it, communicating it well, that can create a serious competitive advantage.
But if you fall short,
then you face real disadvantages. Losing market share, maybe struggling to hire people, definitely losing investor confidence. It's becoming table stakes in many areas.
That kind of pressure makes the risks sound very tangible if companies don't get on board. What are some of the big ones outlined in the material?
Well, the sources break down several key risks. First up is business risk.
Okay.
This is about the industry itself changing because of environmental pressures. If a company doesn't see this coming or doesn't act, their whole strategy could just become, obsolete.
So their entire way of doing business might just not work anymore because the environmental context has shifted.
Precisely. It's a strategic threat. Then you've got regulatory risk.
Right, the rules and laws.
Exactly. Now, some standards, like ISO 14000 for environmental management, they aren't always legally mandatory everywhere.
But they probably help.
Oh, definitely. They help meet legal minimums, maybe even get you some advantages. But the crucial part is the mandatory regulations, country-specific, industry-specific rules.
Fail to meet those and you're in trouble.
Big trouble. Serious disadvantage, reputational damage. I mean, compliance is just becoming necessary for survival in a lot of sectors.
And that ties straight into the next one, I guess, reputation risk.
Directly. This is all about falling short of what your stakeholders expect from you. And the sources really highlight greenwashing here.
Ah, yes, greenwashing. So basically, pretending to be greener than you actually are.
That's it. Overstating your actions, misleading claims. The fashion industry often gets called out on this as an example in the material.
And that kills trust, presumably.
Completely erodes it, which is why the sources stress transparency. But not just any transparency. It has to be based on accurate, credible information.
How do companies achieve that credibility?
Frameworks like integrated reporting, or IR, are mentioned. That's about connecting financial and non-financial performance to show how you create value overall.
Okay.
And also getting third-party verification, like the EU's Eco-Management and Audit Scheme, EMS. That external stamp of approval really helps build credibility.
So we've had business strategy risk, regulatory, reputation. What else?
Operational risk. This is where environmental stuff directly messes with your day-to-day operations.
Like a physical impact.
Exactly. The source material gives a really stark example. Severe droughts in Taiwan, hitting computer chip production.
Why?
Because making chips needs huge amounts of water. So drought means less water means fewer chips. That ripples through global supply chains instantly.
Wow. That shows a real vulnerability.
It really does.
Yeah.
And finally, there's financial risk. Pretty straightforward, this one.
The bottom line.
Yep. Costs can be direct, like having to pay to clean up pollution your company caused.
Right.
Or they can be indirect, losing sales because your reputation is shot. Or facing fines.
Okay, so the risks are clear and they hit multiple fronts. Strategy, operations, reputation, finance. But you said it's not all doom and gloom. Adapting also creates opportunities.
Absolutely. And you can really see this playing out if we look at specific industries. Maybe start with fashion.
Good idea. The sources definitely point to fashion, particularly fast fashion, being under a lot of scrutiny.
Yeah, and the material defines fast fashion pretty clearly. It's all about cheap, almost disposable clothes, getting trends onto shelves super fast, low prices.
And the environmental impacts listed are pretty sobering.
They are. Just the sheer volume of clothes made and thrown away so quickly, the resources wasted, the pollution from manufacturing not using materials efficiently, and then the massive landfill problem.
The sources mention large global companies selling clothes designed for short lifespans having a really significant footprint.
Right. And this hasn't gone unnoticed. Stakeholders are widely dissatisfied. You've got groups like Greenpeace taking very public action.
And international efforts, too.
Yes, like the UN Alliance for Sustainable Fashion. There's a growing movement.
You know, historically, you could argue, well, if customers are buying in and the company's profitable, isn't that enough?
That was maybe the old logic. But the sources make a really powerful point here about the media. Negative press has become a massive driver for change in fashion.
More powerful than positive press.
Apparently so. There's research cited Rusin and Raggeds from 2020 showing negative stories have a significant negative impact. And crucially, it seems that impact is greater than the benefit from positive stories.
Wow. So bad publicity really, really hurts these brands.
It makes taking real action pretty much essential for business success now, not just, a nice to have.
So given that pressure, what are fast fashion brands actually doing, according to the sources?
Well, they're trying various things. Recycling schemes are common, getting customers to bring back old clothes.
What happens to those clothes?
They get sorted. Some might be resold secondhand. Some get turned into things like cleaning cloths. Others get broken down into textile fibers for things like insulation.
Okay, what else?
Using more sustainable materials, bamboo is mentioned as an example. Designing buildings, like shops or headquarters, to have less environmental impact.
That offsetting, like planting trees.
Yeah, attempting to offset their carbon footprint is another strategy mentioned.
And are they talking about this stuff, communicating it?
Definitely. Communication and accountability seem key. Integrated reporting, IR, comes up again as a tool. Many big labels issue separate sustainability reports now or have big sections in their annual reports.
Setting targets, too.
Yes, setting public targets so stakeholders can hold them accountable.
But the greenwashing issue still exists. The marketing sometimes gets ahead of the reality.
The sources suggest it's still a challenge, yeah. Marketing hype versus real deep changes. But the pressure groups aren't letting up.
Suggesting maybe that stronger, more credible actions will eventually be forced on them?
Seems likely if they want to succeed long term. And governments are getting involved too.
Like where?
France's Paris Good Fashion Initiative from 2019 is mentioned. Similar things are happening in China and India.
So it's pressure from all sides, governments, competitors, consumers, investors worried about the future.
Exactly. All reinforcing the idea that not acting sustainably is going to seriously erode your market share and your reputation.
It's a powerful combination of forces. Okay, let's shift the spotlight. What about the motor industry? Another giant facing pressure.
Absolutely. Similar pressures in some ways, but also distinct ones. Stakeholders concerned about the environment, yes, but also about raw materials.
Yeah.
And critically, political ultimatums.
Yeah, the sources sound quite blunt about this one, saying organizations basically have no choice but to change if they want to stay in the game.
Pretty much. The political threat is highlighted as huge. Things like the European Green Deal demanding greener solutions across the board.
And specific deadlines like the UK banning new petrol and diesel car sales from 2030.
Right. That forces manufacturers' hands. What we see as consumers, obviously, are the hybrid and electric cars. That's the visible change.
But the changes go deeper.
Much deeper, according to the sources, into the actual production processes, the supply chains, even the skills the workforce needs for sustainable manufacturing. It's a massive internal shift, too.
And specific challenges like battery recycling becoming a major focus.
That's mentioned as a key sustainability area they need to tackle.
And are they reporting more, like the fashion brands?
Yes, definitely seeing increased sustainability reporting, more use of IR. Some companies are going further, establishing dedicated sustainability management committees, holding specific integrated report meetings. It's becoming embedded in governance.
What strikes me as really interesting from the material is how this whole sustainability push isn't just changing the existing companies.
Right, it's actually changing the structure of entire industries.
How so?
Well, the sources suggest that the growing importance of sustainability has actually, perhaps counterintuitively, lowered some of the traditional barriers to entry in certain sectors.
That's fascinating. So new players can get in more easily. Let's talk about that threat of new entrants. In fashion, for instance.
Exactly. The focus on sustainability has really opened the door for smaller companies, the slow fashion brands.
Whereas before, the big barriers were things like brand loyalty to established names or the huge economies of scale the giants had.
Precisely. But these slow fashion companies, as the sources describe them, focus on different things. Responsible sourcing, quality materials, eco-friendly making processes, and designing clothes to last. More classic styles, maybe.
And they can often charge more.
They can, because customers value those ethical and sustainable credentials. They build really strong customer loyalty on that basis. Their success is described as rising unprecedentedly.
What about the motor industry? Traditionally, very high barriers there.
Extremely high. The massive capital needed, complex manufacturing. But again, new technologies focused on sustainability are creating openings.
Like electric vehicle startups.
Yes. Companies whose whole mission might be explicitly about accelerating the shift to sustainable energy, they come in with a different angle.
And you mentioned potential entrants from outside the traditional auto sector, too.
Right. Companies may be rooted in sustainable tech or digital tech, like those developing self-driving capabilities. They see an opportunity to bring their expertise and sustainability focus into the car market.
So new companies entering, but the sources also talk about new types of businesses emerging as substitutes.
That's right. Often smaller outfits, again, built entirely around their sustainability credentials.
What kind of examples did the sources give?
Things like refill shops, packaging-free stores, places selling loose goods where you bring your own containers.
Often focusing on local products?
Yeah, often. And they really rely on customers actively seeking out ethical and sustainable choices. The material notes they're quite vulnerable, though. Often smaller, maybe without big institutional investors. Their reputation is everything. One negative story, one association with a bad product could potentially wipe them out. Their whole model is built on trust in their standards.
That makes sense. Any other examples of substitutes?
Well, think about the boom in things like reusable travel mugs and drinks bottles.
Oh yeah, huge market now.
Part of that is definitely driven by people wanting to cut down on disposable cups and plastic bottles. And the sources point out that smaller companies applying really strong ethical and sustainable practices have thrived in that space.
Okay, so pulling all these threads together from our deep dive, the overwhelming message seems to be that organizations, industries, they're all facing this intense, increasing pressure.
From all sides, customers, employees, investors, governments, communities. Pressure to act sustainably.
And we've seen there are huge risks if they fail to do that.
But equally, the research shows that recognizing those threats, adapting, taking action that creates real opportunities and benefits too.
And a key takeaway, repeated in the sources, seems to be about communication. It's not enough just to do good things.
Absolutely critical point.
Right.
To actually get the benefits, build trust, gain that advantage, companies have to report on what they're doing credibly. Transparently.
Using things like integrated reporting, solid sustainability reports, marketing messages that people can actually believe.
Exactly. That credibility is key.
So this deep dive really paints a picture of these powerful forces just completely reshaping markets, doesn't it? Influencing product design, manufacturing, how companies even talk about themselves.
Is fundamental change.
Which leaves us with a final thought, really drawn from the material. Given this intense, growing pressure from literally every angle, government, consumers, competitors, investors, and the very clear risks of not acting, is this whole sustainability push just becoming a matter of basic survival for many organizations now? Or is it actually something bigger? Is it fundamentally redefining what a successful business even looks like in the 21st century?
That's the big question, isn't it? Yeah. Something for you to think about as you look at the companies and industries around you.